Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Gwilda Wiyaka's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the Science of Magic or endorsed in any manner by Gwilda Wiyaka, Relmar McConnell Media Company, its affiliated networks, stations, or employees. Welcome to the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, a program dedicated to uncovering the unified nature of reality and humanity's ever-evolving place as truly galactic beings. For more information on the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit us online at www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Welcome to the Science of Magic, a place where science and magic come together to transform fact into evolving truth. We can be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour, we'll be exploring It's Just Your Imagination. I've written since I was a preteen. Poetry was the first way of processing emotions as a young girl when there was no one present to help me. Eventually, my writing evolved into fiction novels. I obtained great solace from dropping into the imagination and recording the seemingly fanciful events and characters to be found there. Much later, when I ran across a box of old writings, I discovered that what I'd written was somewhat prophetic. There was an English lit teacher in college in Switzerland that I greatly respected, so I shared one of my stories to get her opinion. She took it home and read it. The next week, she pulled me aside and asked my age when the story was written. I had been 14. She asked where I'd learned about Celtic lore and magical practices, and I informed her I didn't know what Celtic was. She believed the story related something that actually happened 3 years later. She said it also accurately described places and practices I had no way of knowing about unless I'd been to Ireland or researched Celtic traditions. Except for being Irish and a Celtic lore buff, she would not have known herself. Since that time, I've come to realize others whose works turn out to be quite prophetic. Many songwriters from the 60s and 70s very accurately portrayed future events and circumstances. My own songs have done the same on numerous occasions. There's a dreamy place I go when I write. In fact, much of my current writing is anchored through snippets of dreams. What is this place, and what am I tapping into? When I drop into that creative place, we enter a state of theta brainwaves. Knowing that didn't help me understand how it connected me to knowledge and occurrences I should not be privy to. It wasn't until I worked with my first shamanic teacher and learned to enter the shamanic trance that understanding came. The shamanic journey trance is a set of rituals that aids the practitioner in consciously dropping their alpha brainwaves to 7.5 hertz in order to transition into theta. Theta is not only a place of creativity, but a bridge from linear thought to unity. It is the connecting point between everyday reality and the quantum level. When we connect to the quantum level, we have access to unity consciousness and the crucible of creation. Everything that manifests must first take form at the quantum level. However, quantum level information is useless to us without a translation point between the raw information and the conscious mind. This translation point is the imagination and presents as a shamanic story, a metaphor that represents the information accessed at the quantum level in a form that can be interpreted by the conscious mind. Shamanism is between 40 and 50,000 years old. Among many other things, it's been used as a very accurate divinational tool. It's also a magical practice in that it can affect change at the quantum level and thus affect outcome. The gateway to divination and manifestation is the imagination. That's why most true shamans are also artisans, bards, and poets. Hidden in our stories and songs are passageways to magical powers and future events. Yet we've been taught to invalidate our imagination as fanciful and unreal. Growing up, how many times were you told, "Oh, honey, it's just your imagination"? But if we cannot imagine a thing, we cannot create it. Magical practices across the ages have used a combination of entering theta, or the imagination, and focusing intent to influence matter at the quantum level, and therefore manifestation. Through the greater understanding of quantum physics, the string theory, science is now starting to uncover the real and viable principles behind magic. Our guest this hour is John L. Steadman, author of H.P. Lovecraft and Black Magical Tradition. He's a scholar of both H.P. Lovecraft and Western occultism. John has been a magical practitioner for over 30 years. He has a Bachelor of Arts from the Michigan State University, a Master of Arts from the University of Virginia, and a Master of Business Administration from the University of Wisconsin. Come get writers and critics who prophesize with your pen. Keep your eyes wide, the chance won't come again. And don't speak too soon, for the wheel's still in spin. There's no telling who it's naming. For the loser now will be later to win, for the times are a-changin'. Bob Dylan, 1964. After this short break, I'll introduce John, and we'll shadow dance with Lovecraft, the occult, black magic, the imagination, and quantum physics. You're listening to The Science of Magic. Prior innovative episodes can always be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State-certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is John L. Steadman, author of H.P. Lovecraft and the Black Magical Tradition. John is a scholar of both H.P. Lovecraft and Western occultism. His website, www.johnlsteadman.com. John, thank you so much for joining us on The Science of Magic.
Well, it's very sweet you having me on here.
I've really been looking forward to our time together. You've combined some very interesting things in your work. Now, let's start out with, in addition to your academic credentials, you hold some other really interesting degrees. Would you mind sharing with what they are and what they mean?
Well, I was a member of Aleister Crowley's O.T.O. when I was a lot younger. In 1977, I was initiated into the O.T.O. in California. That was when Grady McMurtry was alive. He was associated with Aleister Crowley, and he'd been given authority to open a branch and run a branch in America. And then I stayed in the O.T.O. for a few years. I worked my way up to the second degree, but what happened is I just kind of lapsed because I started to reconsider that type of magic, and I also reconsidered, like, Crowley as being the prophet of the new eon. You know, the more that I learned about Crowley and the more I learned about myself, I realized that even though the Book of the Law, I believe, was dictated by an extraterrestrial intelligence, I just couldn't accept the premises of the Book of the Law or Crowley's status as the prophet. So I parted on good terms with the O.T.O.
Speaking of magic, would you define it for us?
Well, what this book, you got to understand something about this book. This book is written for people that have no knowledge of Lovecraft's connection with occultism. They hear a lot of stuff. They hear that Lovecraft may have been a practicing magician, or he may have even known Aleister Crowley. They hear that perhaps his entities are actual extraterrestrial entities from the Sumerian culture and mythos. And so I wrote it for people that were interested in those kind of questions. So it's not a book for specialists. What I do in the first chapter is I define what magic is, and I describe the different types of magic, the two types, and then I talk about the magical methodologies. And I do that primarily for those people who don't know anything about the topic, because they need to have that information as a groundwork so they can understand the rest of the things I talk about. The emphasis in the book is basically on Lovecraft's connection with occultism, what he knew about, how much he knew, and I look at things like the various Necronomicons and which one I believe is more genuine than the others in terms of magical practice. I look at the great old ones, and then in the latter half of the book I look at Lovecraft's specific influence on exact magical systems like the voodoo religion, the Wiccan religion, chaos magic packs and stuff like that. So it's actually a book for the general reader, not the specialist. As for magic, I actually do distinguish between two types of magic, black magic and white magic, but I do not argue that there's such a thing as evil associated with black magic. I define evil as being simply an action that you have to determine whether it's good or bad based on the behavior or its effects. It has nothing to do with what type of magic you practice. So black magic is primarily done for knowledge of yourself and the world, the quantum realm, as you put it in your little discussion there, and also for power, magical power, and good. And white magic, however, is magic that's done primarily for spiritual perfection. You're trying to achieve some kind of union with a higher self or with a god form. And so that's the way that I distinguish the two. And according to that definition, somebody like Aleister Crowley was a white magician because he was interested in spiritual perfection his whole life, but he was not a good man. He was a pretty bad, kind of unpleasant, unethical man, so he's a perfect example of a practitioner that is actually a white magician, but he's a bad person. And then vice versa. We've had popes in history that were supposedly they're high beings, ethical beings, but they really weren't. They were practicing Christianity, but they were evil men. So the good or evil distinction is something apart from black and white magic.
So am I to understand, and help me if I'm wrong here, but white magic is a little more passive or receptive, and black magic is more like wielding power?
Well, if you want to view it that way, but I would say it's just based on spiritual perfection. Like the O.T.O, for instance, the main goal of the O.T.O is to perfect yourself. You're supposed to achieve the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, which is kind of like a god form, or your higher self, but that's the goal. And then you climb up the ladder into higher and higher insight, and Crowley climbed those ladders and argued that he'd actually become a perfect being or a god when he was 60 years old. So it's just basically based on like the kind of way you're emphasizing magic. Now, of course, a white magician might want to use magic for things like for knowledge or power, and you do gain knowledge when you're evoking your holy guardian angel. You do gain knowledge, so there is some kind of overlapping between the two, but I define magic based on what your primary purpose is in magic. But when I say power, a lot of people get mistaken. They think you power to dominate people, and it's not that kind of power at all. And knowledge to dominate people, and it's not that kind of knowledge either. It's more like knowledge of yourself in different realms of being, in different realms of experience. So it's good knowledge, and it's good power.
So we're all on the same page. Would you please tell us a little bit about H.P. Lovecraft?
Yeah, well, Lovecraft was a 20th century writer. He was born in 1890 in the famous Yellow 90s, and he died very young in 1937. He was only 47 years old, and he was basically a very interesting guy because he was like a lot of us. There was one part of Lovecraft that was like the daytime Lovecraft, and this was a very materialistic. He called himself a mechanist materialist, and he was up on all the scientific things. He was involved in the early phase of quantum physics, so he knew all the quantum physicists. He knew about the early cosmologies and stuff, and he didn't believe in the supernatural or in gods or goddesses. He called himself an atheist. So that was a daytime Lovecraft. However, Lovecraft wasn't really an atheist because he kept an open mind. He realized that man's knowledge was imperfect, and when we get more knowledge and more technology, our knowledge will widen, and then perhaps we will discover supernatural things, but he said that we hadn't done it yet. So he was kind of more like an agnostic, I would think, than an atheist. But there was also the nighttime Lovecraft, and this was a guy that was troubled by these really vivid dreams, weird dreams, and it was that part of him that kind of inclined him to write weird tales and into writing horror fiction. And he never resolved that dichotomy in his entire life, so I think that's why his work is so effective, because he didn't really believe in the things he was creating, but when he did create entities, they were very sophisticated entities. You were talking about the quantum universe earlier, his entities are in full accord with the way quantum physics would view the alternate dimensions. And they're very sophisticated. They haven't been surpassed today. I mean, when you look at horror stories today, it's still the old conventional human-centric horror stories, vampires, werewolves, ghosts, zombies. But Lovecraft's entities fully transcend these kind of human-centric views, and they're totally in alignment with the views of the quantum physicists today. So you get the best of all possible worlds with Lovecraft. You get totally sophisticated entities that aren't anything human-centric about them, and yet you get all the horror, too, and the kind of thrills that you would get from any kind of horror writer. So the fact they didn't resolve that dichotomy is very much to our benefit because of this great literature they wrote. I should tell you, he wrote Weird Tales. They were published mostly in Weird Tales magazine. Never had a book published in his lifetime, and when he died, he thought he was a complete failure. He thought that his reputation would be gone, which is a surprise, because look at him now. I mean, if he was alive today, he'd be richer than Bill Gates.
Yeah. What made you decide to write about his works?
Well, I have always been interested in horror and science fiction and fantasy when I was in middle school. And when I was in grade school, I first discovered Lovecraft. I went to the store, and there was a paperback book that had this really lurid cover on it. It had like an orange skull it was on fire, and there was a black background. It said The Color Out of Space and Other Horror Stories by H.P. Lovecraft. Never heard of the man, back when I was in grade school, but I figured that cover was so good that there had to be some good stories. And I'd read a lot of horror and science fiction up until that point. And so I bought the book, and I mean, the book was like a revelation. The stories were so good, and then I was hooked on Lovecraft. And then when I was in middle school and going in high school, I graduated to actual occult practices. And I discovered Aleister Crowley, Anton LaVey, of course, the head of the Church of Satan. And Lovecraft kept coming up. I was reading Lovecraft stories, but Anton LaVey and his satanic rituals had a whole chapter where they used Lovecraftian mythos elements in magical rituals. I discovered the Necronomicons around the 70s, late 70s, and late 60s and the mid 70s. Magicians were using Lovecraft as well. You had the Simon Necronomicon out there, and other Necronomicons. So Lovecraft just kept coming up in magical practice. I kept hearing about him. And so then I slowly moved away from Western magic and, of course, the O.T.O. toward exclusive work with the Lovecraftian mythos.
So I have about a minute here, a little bit more. What is Lovecraft's influence on modern black arts, as you see it?
Well, in my book, I in the latter half of it, I explore that. Now, there's a direct connection in the Chaos Magicians. His whole thesis and his mythology has been adapted wholeheartedly by the Chaos Magicians, and they acknowledge that, and I have a chapter on that. Kenneth Grant's Typhonian O.T.O., which was an offshoot of the Aleister Crowley's O.T.O., he broke away from it, turned it into kind of a matriarchal O.T.O. with the emphasis on the high priestess rather than the priest. And he explored the darker aspects of the Crowley system. Kenneth Grant acknowledged Lovecraft's influence, and in his series of Typhonian trilogies, he discusses that. So I've got a chapter on that. Of course, I've got a chapter on the Church of Satan, and this bothers some people because they think Satanism, devil worship, sacrifice of children, that sort of nonsense. But there isn't any of that in Anton LaVey's system at all, and he had those chapters on Lovecraft. So the influence with those three systems is very direct and immediate. I explore that in my book. With the Wiccan religion and with the voodoo religions, which are two of the most oldest forms of pagan practices in the world, the influence is more theoretical. Like the quantum physics nature of the voodoo theories and the voodoo practices, that's been explored by other writers recently, and that certainly connects with a lot of Lovecraft theories. And then the Wiccan horn god connects with some of Lovecraft's things too. So I have two chapters to explore that too, but it's more indirect with the Wiccan religion and the voodoo religion because they were predecessors of Lovecraft, so he couldn't have really influenced them because they didn't know about Lovecraft. So the influence is more in the modern forms of those things nowadays. But the influence with the other three that
we're going to have to take a break. We'll pick up on the other side. John and I will return to our discussion after the news at the bottom of the hour. You're listening to The Science of Magic. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Previous broadcasts of thought-provoking episodes can always be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. We will be back, so don't you go away. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. Visit us online at www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is John L. Steadman, author of H.P. Lovecraft and the Black Magical Tradition. John is a scholar of both H.P. Lovecraft and Western occultism. His website, www.johnlsteadman.com. John, we were exploring Lovecraft and magic and what effect he had on it. Do you think that he was a magical practitioner himself, or that he simply accessed information about it through his imagination or dreams?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. That's why I explore in my book. I can say definitely he was not a magical practitioner, and I do not think that he was actually in touch with actual extraterrestrial entities. I think his entities were basically fictional entities, but we're in a hazy kind of realm here. You probably like the Harry Potter books, right? Most people that I know like the Harry Potter books.
Yes.
Yeah, well, you remember in the sixth book, or no, the seventh book, the last one, just before Harry Potter killed off Lord Voldemort, he went to this little alternate dimension. It looked like King's Cross Station in London, and he met Albus Dumbledore. Now, Dumbledore died in the previous book, and they have a little conversation. And it's kind of like Harry Potter's clarifying his mind a little bit. At the end of the conversation, Dumbledore gets ready to leave, and Harry Potter says, well, just a minute, sir. You know, is this real? Is this really happening, or is this happening inside my head? And Dumbledore said to him, well, of course it's happening inside your head, but why does that mean it's not real? And I think that's a very valid point. There's a very thin line between the fictional and reality, and if it exists in your mind, you were talking before, your little preamble about the imagination, use the imagination kind of as a groundwork to actually form things, magical things. If you view it that way, you know, fictional things are real because you can use them. They can have an effect. And so I would say that Lovecraft's entities are like that. They've been used over time, not only literarily, but also by other magical practitioners, and by me, of course, too. And over time, they build up to the point where they actually have power, like a battery, a charged battery or something. And you could argue that all the gods and goddesses in history started out that way, like the god of Abraham. Back in the old days, there's been so much energy being fed into this image ever since Moses went up on Mount Sinai. You know, there's been so much energy put in there that it becomes like a big source of power. And whether it exists or not in an ontological state doesn't make any difference. I mean, it's still a source of power. And I would argue that all the people that pray to that God, that worship that God, all the churches, they give it more and more power, and you can use that power magically. And the same thing with Lovecraft's entities, you know. So I think there's a very thin line between the fictional and the... You know, I wanted to talk about something else. You mentioned the science of magic. Now, you call your show the science of magic because you feel that the two are moving closer together, and they're going to move even closer together in the future?
Yes, I do. I think that we're coming into a time of more unity consciousness, and that's just kind of the natural progression. That right now, where, you know, is it scientific or is it magical? It seems to be diametrically opposed, but I really do see them coming together in the future.
That's the way I see it, too, you know, because quite frankly, you know, science, we have all this wonderful speculative science, the quantum physicists, and you were talking about the string theories, the probability distributions, and their view of the universe is basically becoming more and more of a magical view of the universe. The only problem with science, and this is a problem they've had for a long time, they've got no way to quantify that stuff. That's why people like Einstein dropped out of the quantum train basically early on, because they were kind of nervous by the fact that it was speculation, but there was no way to quantify. There was no empirical evidence to back it up. I would argue in the future our science will become more and more sophisticated, and that ultimately magic and science are going to have to embrace one another, because quite frankly they're going to need magic in order to find ways to actually access the things that they're talking about. They haven't got any way to access right now. They talk about, but there's still a divide between the subatomic level and the level of Newtonian physics, and they've got to find some way to bridge that. And I would argue that shamanism, magic, and all these things are ways to bridge that, whether we understand what we're talking about or not. That's a way to do it. So they're going to have to embrace us like they did at the beginning when we had alchemy and other disciplines.
Boy, I'm so with you there, because it's like, as a shamanic practitioner, I can go out and see what's going on at the quantum level, and I've come to recognize that a lot of our metaphors, gods, goddesses, and this and that are simply translation points for that information. Have you found that?
Yeah, and the interesting thing, Lovecraft was on board with that one too, because he viewed the human mind like when you're born, you're already being conditioned to see things a certain way, and then you go through the school system, you go through the socialization, and there's a barrier there. And a lot of philosophers argue that way too. Speculative realists, they say that we don't really know what's behind that barrier because our senses and our humanity gets in the way. And Lovecraft would agree with that. In fact, he argues that the entities like artists, when you ask an artist like draw Cthulhu or draw Yog-Sothoth, they'll come up with a very human-centric kind of view. But Lovecraft argues that what we see is just our way to understand something the human mind and the human mechanism can't really understand at all. And so what we do is we grab things from other aspects of our lives and mind and kind of throw it at the thing in order to try and get some way to understand what we're looking at, but we really can't see what it is until we get past the rational facade that's on top of it. And the quantum physicists are arguing that way now, that there's a level of reality and that we really can't accept it because we've been conditioned not to.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's like, if it's like Einstein proposed, and reality is just really a set of frequencies, these physical bodies that we live in do the best they can to translate frequency into what we've created, what we call reality. But it's just frequency. And so who's to say it can't be translated 16 other ways?
That's true, and what quantum physicists say is they view everything in terms of like probability distributions, amplitudes, maxima and minima. And what they claim is the reason why we see things the way we do now is simply because we selected it, which is kind of silly. That's not really a definition at all. They're saying we see the world this way because that's the way we selected it, but if we selected it some other way, then it wouldn't be like that at all. And they argued that the fact that we selected that way means that the other things don't exist because we didn't select them. But do you see how imperfect that definition is? I mean, when they actually study like the wave patterns and stuff, they find out that there's all sorts of different solutions or different ways of looking at it, but we're limited by our own imperfections, and we only see it a certain way. But that doesn't mean that that's the only way it is. And I would argue that the use of magic allows you to see it different ways and utilize it different ways, even though you can't explain it. I mean, I'll try and explain it. You'll try and explain it. I'll say, well, I'm out here in a circle. I'm waving wands. I'm vibrating words, I'm burning incense and stuff, and that seems ridiculous. I can't say, are these things actually causing what's happening? It sounds silly, right? It's something that a rational person would laugh at, but for some reason, the use of these things, and I don't understand why it's that way, but the use of these kind of things allows me to get behind that human-centric veil and experience something. I don't want to even call it real, because real is an imperfect view too. Experience something outside of myself or something different than me.
I find it fascinating. Do you think that when we're working with the gods and the goddesses and the archetypes, that we're actually connecting with something that we have created and empowered, and then use the power from that in ritual?
These are the kind of things that I used to ask questions like that. And what used to bother me when I was younger, I followed the Western magical tradition. And I would do those rituals that you would find in those old 13th century grimoires and stuff. I remember conjuring up Bartzabel, the spirit of Mars, one time. And I did everything in the ritual thing. I had assistants with me. And the spirit appeared in a triangle outside the circle, just like he was supposed to look. You know, he was dressed like a Martian entity, and I was conversing with him, interacting with him. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, God, did I actually create this thing out of my mind? It's so perfect, you know. I mean, it looks like the way that I want it to look, but I started to question whether there was something actually there or not outside my mind, because it looked just the way I expected it to look. And then I got into Lovecraftian rituals, and I discovered when I did Lovecraftian rituals, for some reason, I had a conviction, although I can't prove it. We can't empirically prove any of this stuff. I had a conviction that I was actually in touch with things, actual extraterrestrial things outside of myself, whether they're on other planets, whether they're in other dimensions, whether they're things that inhabit my unconsciousness. They were things that were not me. And that's why I was hooked on Lovecraftian magic after that, because it seemed more real to me, but I can't prove that. I just can't prove that.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to have to take another little break here. Our guest this hour is John L. Steadman. He's the author of H.P. Lovecraft and the Black Magical Tradition. John is a scholar of both H.P. Lovecraft and Western occultism. His website is www.johnlsteadman.com. John and I will be back on the flip side of this commercial break. You're listening to The Science of Magic, the place where altruistic professionals of science and the esoteric create common ground for the betterment of our world. You can always listen to previous transformative broadcasts on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, bringing together gifted people of service to our world. Our website is www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is John L. Steadman. He's the author of H.P. Lovecraft and the Black Magical Tradition. John is a scholar of both H.P. Lovecraft and Western occultism. His website, www.johnlsteadman.com. John, do you see archetypes as holding a particular set of frequencies for the magical practitioner to align with in order to effect a particular change at the quantum level?
Yeah, you can view it that way. I try not to quantify that myself, but that's certainly a good definition of what goes on there. But I really don't know, to tell you the truth. I mean, I love stuff like this, like your show, the shamanism and stuff. At the very basic level, it's stimulating to the imagination, and that's something. I mean, look at Lovecraft. His imagination was very widely stimulated. He created all these wonderful works. Whether they actually devolve into actual magical practices or insights or not, it doesn't really matter. They can or they can't, but you've got to get the imaginative hook in there first. And so I think it's very important, like what you're doing. In one of these introductions, you said, like, making the world better or something like that. This makes the world better. Thinking about stuff like this, reading imaginative literature, and then hopefully gravitating toward actual practice. But if you want to view it like change the frequency and stuff, sure. whatever way that you want to quantify. I've given up quantifying. In the old days, I used to do that a little bit more. I'm just happy if I go into the circle or the ritual, the chamber, and I get some kind of result where I learn something, where I have a fresh insight towards something. I'm just happy if I get that. I don't care. Like when I walk into a room and it's dark and I turn on the lights, I don't really care about the circuit breakers or where the electricity comes from or how to change sockets and whatever. All I care about is where the lights come on. So I've gone to that level in my magical practice.
That's a really good place to be, because from there you can be spontaneous and you always get to be surprised. I really feel that we're all magicians. It's just how conscious are we of what we're doing? How purposeful are we?
Oh, little kids are magicians. Like when you think about it, like they're closest to the earlier things, so socialization hasn't quite killed them. And little kids will actually believe, if they say, I'm princess or something, they actually believe that. And if they could channel that energy, they would be that, But the problem is then society comes in, and then pretty soon they forget. Some of them don't, you and me haven't forgot, so we learned it and stuff. But it's really a shame, if I would argue that all people are natural, but just we all had these powers at one time. It's not to say we're only using like 1/10 of our brain. That's very true. We are. And the reason why, it's our own fault, basically. So we've got to find ways to reuse those parts of the brain. But right now, I just can't quantify any of that stuff. I just do it, And if it inspires other people, that's fine,
So changing the subject a little, what are chaos magicians?
Well, what chaos magic is, it actually came about late. It's the latest magical system, so it's my last chapter is about that. But it was developed among writers that actually didn't like the more conventional magical things. They thought it was a little bit too dogmatic, so they wanted to kind of streamline it a little bit. And they based it on Austin Osman Spare, who was actually an associate of Aleister Crowley. And what they done is they just simplified magic to the point. They actually used chaos. They actually used quantum theories as the base of their things. But what they try and do is actually a way to kind of trick the mind. And what they argue that the rational mind actually interferes with a person's ability to actually do magic. And so what they do is they have a whole mechanism where they try and do magic where the conscious mind is no longer involved. And but I would argue, like in my chapter, I argue too that it's really not that different from other kinds of magic. It's just kind of talks about that sort of thing a little bit more and stuff. But it's basically the same kind of magical practice. If you look at chaos magical ritual, it's actually a stripped down version of another kind of ritual. And what they do is they'll have you create these evocations or invocations, and rework it so many times it actually doesn't mean anything to the conscious mind anymore. And they argue that once you do that and then you perform the ritual, the mind is out of it. You've forgotten any kind of connection, and then the unconsciousness kicks in, and the results happen. And I've got some arguments with that kind of a theory. I don't really think that that's what they're actually doing here. But the chaos magic packs are like, it's very loose. It's not like big magical organizations. They're usually covens of chaos magic practitioners. Some of them are just individual workers. And so they're probably the closest to kind of Lovecraftian magic, I suppose, that you could come up with. But sometimes they go a little too far. They take all the symbolism out so much that I don't think they're gaining any results at all. But what they're doing is a sleight of mind, where you're actually you fake it until you make it. That's the way they interpret. You fake it until you make it. And it's nothing new under the sun. Like in the book of Isaiah, they say there's nothing new under the sun. Chaos magic isn't anything new, but they're more aggressive about bringing quantum physics, philosophies, and theories into magical practice, and they're trying to streamline. Aleister Crowley did that himself, of course. When he left the Golden Dawn, he streamlined rituals and published them in the Equinox, and so he broke them down to more basic elements too. So they're following that same kind of principle. But they're good. I'm in favor of all these systems, like the Church of Satan. There's so many satanic groups coming up nowadays. There's all these different Wiccan covens. I'm in favor of all this stuff for the same reason I'm in favor that people should read people like Lovecraft, because they stimulate the imagination. They encourage people that there are things other than themselves. I went to business school. I have an MBA in accounting and finance, right? And most of my classmates, they couldn't see beyond their nose, basically. They wanted to make a lot of money. They want nice cars, nice houses. and they don't know what to do with themselves. You know, they have all the money, and then what are they doing? They keep finding distractions because they don't want to face themselves and any kind of reality there is. So more cars, more monies, cheating on their wife, you know, whatever, playing golf, you know, watching videos and stuff. I mean, I don't know. You know, I'm rambling. I'm sorry.
Before we run out of time, where can people find your book?
Okay, well, the book is all over the place. You can buy it in any bookstore. I went on Google Chrome one time, and it's all over the place in different countries, too. But you can, of course, order it directly through the publisher, Red Wheel, but it's on Amazon. And Amazon, it's like about $5 cheaper than other places. On Barnes & Noble. It's on all the online websites. So you can find it all over the place. You know, I would order it on Amazon just because it's a little bit cheaper. I have various events that I'm going to do. I'm at the end of summer. I'm going to be in Buffalo, New York at the Carnival of Power Horror, and I'm going to give 2 presentations, one on a Saturday on the 27th and one on Sunday, the 28th. And one's going to be about Lovecraft's influence on the cinema, and the other is going to be an analysis of Lovecraft's entity Shub-Niggurath and how it redefines the Wiccan archetypes, you know. So people might want to hook up with me there. On my blog and on my website, I have a list of all my events, radio interviews such as this one, and book signings and stuff like that. So I'm pretty easy to find. But the book I would recommend for everybody because it's a really good, not only a good explanation of Lovecraft's connection with these systems, but also it's a good introduction to the black magical systems. You read it and you understand what Kenneth Grant's system's all about. You understand what chaos magic is all about, who the principal moves are, what the principal books are, you know. So it's actually a good introduction to magic, black magic in general, and a great analysis of Lovecraft's influence. So, and it's only like 286 pages, so I packed a bunch of stuff into there in only a couple hundred pages. So it's a good buy for the money, I think.
Well, I'm really, really glad that you took the time to write it, because I think there's so much misunderstanding about magic and what it really is and what's black magic and what's white magic. And it's wonderful to have someone take the time to clarify for us. I can't thank you enough, John, for being a guest on The Science of Magic and for furthering the science and magic coming together.
Okay, thank you, and it was a pleasure.
This has been The Science of Magic. Remember, you can always listen to past thought-provoking episodes on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. Until next time, dear ones, may you be blessed with knowledge, comforted with love, as you explore the magical world of your imagination.